My friend and I had just moved to Portland, Oregon after college. One day he asked me if he could borrow my .35 Magnum to take on a deer archery hunt he was planning the next weekend. He didn't think he would need to use it, but was concerned about the large bear population where he would be hunting. I loaned it to him. He arrived at the hunting site deep in the woods at the end of a logging road around twilight. Wanting to start hunting first thing in the morning, he rode his mountain bike in the dark to where he had hung his stand to spread some scent and make sure his shooting lanes were still open. As he crouched down to dribble doe urine on a bush, he felt the presence of something behind him. He stood and turned, reaching for the only light he had brought with him, one of those little key ring LED lights that turn on when you squeeze it. He squeezed the lights on and saw a pretty large set of eyes about 3 feet off the ground reflect back at him. The LED light was too weak to show anything else, just a reflection of those eyes. Thinking it was normal that a bear or deer would mistaken him for an animal, after all he was crouched down and smelled like deer urine, he stood straight up, clapped his hands and said, "Get out of here," in a firm voice, expecting that the confused animal would bolt away when it realized he was human. His actions did not bring the expected results. Instead of turning and running away, the eyes slowly rose to over 9 feet tall and took a step towards him. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread and quickly pulled the .357 out of the holster. Holding the revolver in one hand and squeezing the LED light in the other, he backed away from the eyes. Every step he took backwards, the eyes matched by advancing towards him, but always staying just out of the ring of the light emitted by the keyring. In a short time, he was backed up against a large tree, which he used to protect his back while he watched the eyes observe him from 10 feet away. The eyes would weave back and forth like a large animal, adjusting his weight from side to side. They would rise and lower slightly like something was studying him from different angles. Even though he never could actually see the animal, he had the sense of something huge. The way it moved, the sound of the leaves and dander under its feet as it walked, the impressive amounts of air that were inhaled and exhaled as it breathed, and most of all, the height of the eyes as they towered over him, all indicated a creature of massive proportions. After an eternity, he lost sight of the eyes, but he could hear the animal circling his position. More than an hour had passed since the last noise or sighting of the eyes. My friend, sitting with his back against a tree and a cocked .357 in his hand, decided it would be safe to leave the area. It was now around 1 o'clock in the morning. He started walking to where he left his mountain bike. To his dismay, he heard the animal paralleling him in the thick brush. The beast followed him to his bike. Not wanting to lose his sense of hearing, his only warning of the animal's position, he chose to push his bike back to the truck instead of riding it. It took him over 4 hours to push the bike back to his camp. When he thought the animal was too close, judging from the sound it made in the underbrush, he would stop and wait. Every time he stopped, the animal would inevitably start to circle him again. When it sounded like its route took a little further away, my friend would start pushing his bicycle again, only to repeat the same routine every 10 minutes or so throughout the torturous night. Finally, after a lifetime, he reached his vehicle, and in an adrenaline and panic-induced sprint, he threw his bike in the back, started the truck, and was headed down the mountain. It took several miles before the heavy sense of doom started to recede. As the adrenaline wore off, the shake started. He started shaking so bad that it was all he could do to keep his truck on the road until he pulled up to his house and into a kitchen chair. That is where I found him a while later when I went over to his house to feed and water his dog. After he told me what had happened to him, I offered to go back with him and retrieve his camping gear and tree stand. He refused the offer and left his possessions to nature rather than return to the area. Even though he hunts and fishes as avidly as ever, he will never go back to that spot and avoids the entire region passionately. In October 1972, my husband, our 2 babies, my brother, and I left Leavenworth, Kansas in our 1968 Volkswagen van on a camping trip to a recreational area in Arkansas called Beaver Lake. When we finally got there, we found a fairly remote campsite at the far end of the park. We wanted to be alone as the babies woke often during the night and needed to be fed. We didn't want to disrupt other campers. Shortly after pulling into our campsite, my brother pitched his tent next to the van. The rest of us were going to sleep in the van. The campsite was in an area with a horseshoe-shaped rocky terrace ledge that rose from around 50 to 100 feet. Because of the mature trees and thick brush, daylight had trouble poking into our spot. Fast forward to that night, sometime around 3:30 a.m., I heard some animal sounds on the ridge that I thought were being made by a coyote. I peered out the window but couldn't see what was making the sounds because it was so dark. Still hearing odd yips and howls, I lay back down on the back seat. Moments later, there's a huge crashing bang on the van wall right next to my head. My husband leapt up and out of sleep. My brother bolted out of his tent and jumped into the van with us. We were all in a panic, looking in every direction, trying to see what had hit the van like that. My father finally yelled that he saw something moving behind the van. We all turned just in time to see a large shadow moving around 20 feet behind the van from left to right. After about 20 minutes had passed without any of us seeing movement out there, my husband and brother went out to inspect the van for damage. We then started hearing pounding steps coming from the brush about 50 feet behind us. The guys eased back into the front seat of the van. That's when my husband turned on the headlights and stepped on the brake pedal for the rear light. Instantly, there was a huge commotion. He started the engine, and that's when in the glow from the headlights we could see a hairy thing 10 feet away from the van coming towards us. As it got closer, its silver-tipped hair glistened in the light. It had a grayish streak from its shoulder down to its back. The creature was walking on 2 legs and was around 7 to 8 feet tall. It had a barrel chest and skinny legs. It never gave us a good view of its eyes, so I couldn't tell you what they looked like. I could see that the face was not ape-like. Its ears had tufts of fur on top of them, and it was very human-like in its movement and general body structure. It moved smoothly and quickly around to the back of the van where it followed the base of the ridge away from us. That's when it let out a menacing howl. Insanely, my brother and my husband bolted from the van trying to get a better look. That's when a shower of gravel came at us. My husband and brother tore back into the van and burned up the road getting us out of there. I kept looking out of the back window and they looked in the rearview mirrors, but none of us ever saw it again. It just doesn't seem like a Sasquatch was what we had seen. It seemed too dog-like in its face and was too slim in its body. I still have PTSD to this day due to that encounter.